Also use my mic. Is this working? Check, check, check. Check. Check, check, 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 check. On the voice mic. Check, check, check. 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 One, check, one. Check, check, check. Check, check, check. Are we good? Check, check, check. Good. Check, check, check. Check, check, check. Check, check, check. Check, check. Check, check, check. Check, check. Check, check, check.
Okay. Good afternoon. Bonjour à tout le monde et bienvenue. Si c'est votre première fois que vous êtes ici à ce concert, bienvenue spéciale et chaleureuse. Et je pense que vraiment une journée au plein milieu, I hope it's not the middle of winter, but towards the end. But regardless, on a lovely snowy day, it's great to gather to enjoy one another's company, to enjoy some tasty treats, and especially to enjoy some wonderful, wonderful music. We're so glad that you're here, and it's been a while since our last concert, so this is the first of the next series, and we're so glad that you found your way here today. We do have a few door prizes, and instead of getting a ticket at the door, as you might have in the past, if you look under your sheet, some of you will find that there is a red sticker, an étiquette rouge, on the back of that program, in which case you are welcome to come up to the front and claim a door prize. Come. There you go. So, there's some side. So, it is yours. Yeah. There are crazy hats. No, we can't have it. There you go. I still have one unclaimed item in case you want to double check. Maybe there? Somebody who's not come? Or is coming? Okay. And all of these are courtesy of the tea company, by the way, this wonderful tea that we are enjoying each time we're here. Yeah, terrific. Once again, to let you know that if you do not consume all of those things on the table, there are some plastic bags, so feel free to take them home. And meanwhile, enjoy them as much as you want while you're here. We are really pleased to welcome, once again, Peter and Leo Purich, who will be our musicians for this afternoon. I don't think there's a better way to break a winter afternoon than to listen to wonderful music, and both of these are exceptional musicians. So we feel very fortunate to have them. And I was also thinking today how special it must be for a child to play with a parent and a parent to play with a child, to have one's love of music passed on to the next generation. And certainly that has happened with these two. And Leo has been a composer since he was a very young child and is a remarkable composer, as you'll see from the description that you'll see in the on your leaflet today. So without any more time that I will waste for you, I am pleased and ask you to welcome Peter and Leo today.
Thank you, Maestro Leo. So that was what I started off with was an etude by Kreutzer. Etudes, or studies, or caprices, these were the studies, the work, the mechanisms by which all musicians, we learn how to play our instruments. And all instruments have these studies, and we all know them. And like the violinists, we have a whole list of them. The pianists have Czerny and other composers that wrote these things. And very often they were just musicians themselves who were teaching, and they had to come up with the material, so they wrote these etudes. And this particular one was by Kreutzer. And what we're doing now is we'd like to bring some of these etudes, which people in the concert hall normally don't hear because these are our work pieces. So we have them sort of like backstage. So we're going to bring a bit of the backstage into the front, not only just to show you what we do, but to show the connections between how some of these pieces actually made their way into the front. So connections between the composers and the performers, or the pieces themselves and how they managed to move into the center stage, let's say. This particular piece made its way in my consciousness, public consciousness, because, well, first of all, I played it, so that was the backstage part. And then one day, when I was a teenager, I was listening to CBC radio, and they were playing an old radio program of Jack Benny. And Jack Benny used to use this, I don't know, how many of you remember Jack Benny? Okay, you're my crowd, very good. So Jack Benny, his persona was that he was a violinist, but maybe not so good. And he was always practicing, he was always taking lessons. And this etude, he did. You might have heard it like that, you know. And he had his long-suffering violin teacher, Monsieur Leblanc, who was played by Mel Blanc, who was the voice of Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck and all those wonderful cartoon characters. So he was playing that part of the teacher, and he'd be always suffering with Jack Benny's lessons, you know, and he'd be, I checked out, marked out a few of them, so he'd be singing along to this etude, you know, like, play it softly while you're learning, not so loud, my stomach's turning, you know, something like that. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, I wish I was in Singapore. So I'm listening to this as a teenager, I'm thinking, this is incredible, I know this etude, and it's getting laughs, and then he hits one thing, he says, bend your thumb, you're not hitchhiking. And I think, wow, that is inside baseball, because you're supposed to bend your thumb when you hold the bow, you know? You bend it like this, not like this. So yeah, you're not hitchhiking, you're not going like that. And this is hilarious. And it was like the joke was written for me, and I think it was, because when I went to school afterwards, I told it to my classmates, and none of them laughed, because they didn't get the joke. So I'd like to thank Jack Benny for writing this joke for me, personally. He could make a joke out of anything, pretty much, and that's what he did. He had a theme song called Love and Bloom, which was originally written for a movie. I think it was called She Loves Me Not, with Bing Crosby. And so he needed a tune, and he just picked this one, and it turned out to be a success. So it turned out to be a signature tune. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to play the signature tune of Jack Benny radio show and TV show, and it's called Love and Bloom. Oh, well, laugh a minute. That was Jack for you. So we're going to continue along a little bit of a history of the etude. We're going to bring it from the past to the front. One of the first, the violin was sort of invented in the mid-1500s, so by the time teachers started getting going, a lot of the treatises didn't start off first half, and there were no little schools back then either. It was just like individuals. So one of the first etude books that I could find was by Tartini from the Baroque era, and Locatelli. Locatelli inspired many others later on. Tartini, of course, was a wonderful composer, and he wrote this treatise, a couple of treatises, and one of them was variations, 50 variations on a theme by Arcangelo Corelli, who was also another composer. So, we're not going to play all 50 of them for you, and in the interest of time, I'm not going to do the repeats either. But we're going to play a few variations by Tartini on a theme by Corelli. And I'm going to be accompanied. Normally these etudes are not accompanied, but we have a wonderful organist here who's going to handle that part. And I'm going to play them on my Baroque bow, and so I can just go on over there and play some variations. So one thing about etudes and exercises is very often they're repetitive, and they do the same thing because they're there to teach you a particular technique. And there will be variations such as you heard, but sometimes simpler variations. For instance, if you have, well, we might do it slurred. Or by, or. So you can imagine it's like hundreds and hundreds of different variations. All this to teach you how to play all these different techniques, which you're going to use later on in small little pieces, in bits and pieces, in the real pieces that you're going to play. So when I was studying, I had a lot of them, and one of my favorite ones was Dankla. And one reason I liked Dankla was because it wasn't that boring, actually. He started to make it a little more interesting. Because the etude, actually, if you've heard of like Chopin etudes, those are played in concert. Liszt etudes, Scriabin etudes for the piano. Of course, the piano has a little more harmonic capabilities, but still, what they did was they elevated the backstage etude into the front stage, and they short pieces with the little characteristics. And so that sort of happened with some of the violin etudes as well. They never really made it so far to the front until Paganini came around with his caprices, extremely difficult and well known. And so they were just more interesting. They weren't that repetitive. So here's an etude that I played when I was younger by Charles Dankla. It's got a bit of a reverie characteristic to it. So as I said, a lot of these etude composers were also real composers, and they composed operas and symphonies and stuff like that, and short little pieces. And also, when I was 12 years old, I played a piece by Charles Dankla, variations on operatic themes. And so we're going to play the sixth air varia on a theme by Mercadante. So as a teacher, you're having a student play these etudes, solo etudes like this, and sometimes it's nice to have a piano accompaniment, but sometimes there's no piano, or you go to the student's house and there's no piano there or whatever. So very often there will be like these very simple accompaniments written for the duos, and nothing special. And so the student will be playing all the hard stuff, and the teacher would just play little piggy things. And this was done quite often. Even some of the advanced things like Wieniawski would write these incredibly difficult things for one violin, and the second violin would just be picking along little notes, so it's a little sort of comic, but so we're going to do one of those. One of our favorites, one of my favorites, is a composer by the name of Matsas. And this is an exercise for flexibility of the wrist. So it's and there's a variation we can play it in triplets. So we're going to play the triplet version. So that was a duo by Matsas, and Matsas also wrote some actual duos where the parts are more equally distributed between the two violins. Well, so many of them. And Leo and I, we started off way back. We just started playing duos all the time, and Matsas was one of our favorites. And well, I think the Matsas duos inspired you to write duos. Yes. So we're going to play a couple by Leo, and he's going to tell you about them.
So, here we are looking behind the curtain, behind the concert stage into the studio. But there's different ways to learn things. And I have a confession, which is that I have not played many etudes. When I was learning, I played some, and I enjoyed it. But most of how I learned the violin was actually playing duos with my dad. So then when I went to learn composition, I also didn't really learn composition normally. I just wrote duos, because I figured what you do when you play is play duos, and what you do when you write, I guess, is write duos. So we're going to play some of my earlier pieces now, which I wrote when I was like 14, 16. And these to me were kind of like etudes, but for composition, because I would just write things and then see how it went and what I liked and what worked, and then keep writing the next thing. So this is opus 98. And that's why I ended up with so many opus numbers. And this first piece that we're going to play was actually also has like an additional layer of being a study, which is that it was actually an English project, a project for my English class. We were studying literary themes of good versus evil, and we had to make some kind of artistic product to represent that theme. So I thought, oh, I'll write a duo. So in this duo, there are two themes, one that's good and one that's evil. It's, you know, it's pretty deep. There's the good and also the evil. So the piece starts off by presenting the two themes, and let's just play these here. So we start off with the so-called evil theme. So that happens, and then we get the good theme. So then the idea is, over the course of the piece, these two themes they start off very separate, but then they kind of merge. Sometimes you get the accompaniment from one and the melody of the other, or both melodies at the same time kind of thing. And then the point is that it ends up where you almost can't tell what's the good and what's the evil. And I'll leave the surprise ending as a surprise. So another interesting thing about that piece that we just played is that the first time we ever played it was right over there at the Cedar Park Coffee House in 2014. Whereas the next piece that we're going to play, which is a duo, another violin duo that I wrote a couple of years later, we actually have never played in public. So this is the world premiere right here. Yeah. And yeah, I wrote this duo in one day because I had a good idea for a duo, and I just sat down and I said, I gotta write this. And that day happened to be Father's Day. So I gave it to my dad as a gift, and it's called the Father's Day Duo for two violins. And it's not Father's Day today, but it is his birthday in 2 days, so Father's Day / birthday duo. So now my dad gets to have some tea, and I will be playing the next two pieces myself on the piano. So we've heard a lot from the violin etude people and a lot of the violin, but of course, in the 18th and 19th centuries, the piano was developing, and along with it, the piano technique, and the composers were engaging with the new kinds of pianos and figuring out what can we do on this new instrument. And one of the people pushing that technique, of course, was Beethoven, but I'm not going to play Beethoven today. One of Beethoven's students, Carl Czerny, was actually much more prolific than Beethoven. This guy wrote like 1,000 pieces. And he studied with Beethoven and apparently knew all of Beethoven's pieces by heart. He was kind of a prodigy himself. And now almost no one knows any of his music. So there you go, just goes to show you. But he was, in fact, very influential as a piano teacher because one of the things he did was he published like hundreds of piano etudes from the very beginning. The idea was you can start from the book 1 of Czerny, and then it goes all the way up to the height of what was considered piano virtuosity at that time. And one of Czerny's most successful students was Franz Liszt, who of course himself went on to teach like everyone who was important and to define the 19th century of piano technique. And so the main Czerny piano method is called the school of velocity. It's all about playing fast. And in the book that I have of this, in the introduction it says, this is from like the early 20th century, but it says, there's probably no pianist alive who has not played Czerny's school of velocity. So that just goes to show the amount of influence that he had, which in a way was coming from Beethoven. But as I said, I didn't really play studies when I was learning. So I never actually, and because I'm not a real pianist, I never actually played the school of velocity, which is why I can't play fast. I didn't get the velocity. But I will be attempting one of the school of velocity for you today. And it's also kind of cold in here, so we'll see how much velocity I can get. All right, so that was the School of Medium Velocity by Czerny. So speaking of Czerny, so I'm talking about Carl Czerny, which is spelled C-Z-E-R-N-E-Y. But there's actually two Czerny composers. Well, there's at least two. I know of two. One of them is Carl Czerny, who was born in 1791 and studied with Beethoven. The other one is Brian Czerny, C-H-E-R-N-E-Y, who was actually my composition teacher, because I did eventually actually learn composition. So I studied with Brian Czerny at McGill, which I recently graduated from. And Czerny has written a whole bunch of interesting music. He's not known for studies, but in 1970, he published this book of studies in 20th century idioms. So this is kind of a different type of study. It's not so much about piano technique, but about learning different kinds of styles and vocabulary. And one of the pieces in this book is called, and remember this is by Brian Czerny, the piece is called Homage to Carl Czerny. So, you know, composers can have a sense of humor too. And I think you'll see the connection. There's a bit of velocity in this one too. So this is Homage to Carl Czerny by Brian Czerny.
So I don't have to repeat the family exposure that Leo's had to music. And my father was an amateur violinist, and so I sort of grew up with music right off from the get-go. The connection. So you go back to my father's origins. He grew up with two brothers, one older brother and one younger brother. Somebody in the family at some point decided, hey, we should give one of the kids violin lessons. My father says, me. So they gave it to the older guy. And he had no interest at all in playing the violin. So it didn't work out. So, what are we going to do? Me, says my father. So they said, oh, we'll give it to the youngest guy, you know. And he also had no interest in it. So they said, that's it. Nobody gets lessons. Yeah. So my father still wanted to play, you know, but nobody was going to pay for the lessons or whatever or make an effort at all. So he had to wait a little while until he sort of could get a job as a young teenager, 12 years old or something like that, to get enough money to pay for his own lessons. And he eventually was, as a teenager, studying with this teacher who used to, from the Vienna school, but he was a Serbian composer and violinist. He composed symphonies and many pieces. And at that time, he was getting really involved in film music as well. and his name was Petar Stoyanovich. And he was a very good teacher for my dad. But unfortunately, the war started around that time, and so lessons were somewhat curtailed, and practicing and whatnot. So things got a little rough, bad timing. In any case, my father did not forget his dear teacher, and whenever he could, he would bring him some milk or some bread or something, because rations, during the occupation was very scarce. And so, Petr Stoyanovich was very appreciative, and he would tell my father, "Oh, thank you so much. I have no money, but I will write a piece for you," And, well, we don't know if he ever did or what it was, lost in the fog of war, the sands of time, et cetera, et cetera. And my father never knew, but it didn't matter. But, and a lot of the pieces we don't really know. It's sort of lost in obscurity. Just to try and find some of the compositions is very difficult. And there was somebody at McGill University was searching for some music, and it was not available. Kathy was, as a librarian there, was trying to find stuff, communicating with people in Serbia and whatnot. It was very difficult, and to get hold of some of this music. And, well, it turns out that Leo was just somewhere in January. He was touring Europe with some stuff, and he went to London, went to the Royal Academy? Yeah, Royal Academy Library, where Kathy told him, I think there's a copy there. So he went there and found this music and brought it back, and there was a piece by Petr Stoyanovich. It's a romance for violin and piano. We don't know if it was the piece that he wrote for my dad, if he ever wrote it, but let's think it was. So here it is, Romance for Violin and Piano by Petr Stoyanovich. People haven't stopped writing etudes today. It's maybe takes different forms. A lot of etudes now are written specifically for certain styles, not necessarily a technique for an instrument. So we have jazz etudes to teach us how to play, how to swing, do stuff like that. And the great Astor Piazzolla, the master of the tango, wrote a whole series of etudes for flute and violin, flute or violin, not both of them. And so I'm going to play etude number 3 by Astor Piazzolla. As I said, there was etudes for a lot of different styles, including jazz. One of my favorite jazz violinists, Joe Venuti. I don't know if any of you have ever heard Joe Venuti, the mad fiddler from Philly. He wrote a couple of books on how to swing and do stuff like that. Also interesting about Joe, he had a different style from, let's say, Stefan Grappelli. So Stefan Grappelli would, a lot of his improvisations would go up and down the fingerboard in this direction, and a lot of Joe's would go like this. So it was sort of mimicking a lot of the etudes that we would have. He'd do a lot of these sort of string crossing things. And one time I was listening to one of his improvs, and he just snuck in a little quote. And I said, hey, that's a Fiorillo etude number 28. You know, this guy, he was classically trained, you know, and he's throwing in these little classical bits that he learned in his etudes. He's throwing them into his jazz improvs. You know, so that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. So we're going to finish off here with a piece by Joe Venuti called Wild Dog, and you can see some of these string crossing things. Think of it sort of etudes that he's putting into an actual piece. Oh, I forgot. Why don't we play the etude, the Fiorillo etude that Venuti was always quoting? We got that for you. It's just an etude for solo violin, but Leo's going to just throw some piano in there as well. Just like he always does, you know, we always fool around like that.
Well, let me, on behalf of everyone here, thank you for a fascinating afternoon of music. And not only were we able to hear some wonderful music, but also some family history, a world premiere, plus some humor. And what more could we ask for in an afternoon? So many thanks again for that wonderful. And hearing that it's your birthday in a couple of days, I've also heard that it is someone's birthday today, and that's Ronaldo. My brain just went Sutherland. Ronaldo Sutherland, it's your birthday, so happy birthday to you. Wonderful. And to you as well in 2 days, Peter. To let you know that the next concert will be in a month. You see information about it on your sheet here. Our musician that day will be Tori Butler, who's a wonderful jazz pianist. And back in October, Tori and I shared worship leadership here on a Sunday morning. And as actually you gave me a great lead in, Peter, because he will tell you, and we'll talk a little bit when he's here, how most jazz musicians are classically trained, and how that classical leads into jazz. And talking ahead of time, Elizabeth, who's our great organizer for these events, said that hearing that helped make jazz click for her. So he's going to be playing some music that's familiar to you, and then we'll take it in directions that you've never heard before. So I hope you are able to join us next month to listen to Tori. And on Friday, you could begin registering. This Friday, you'll see the information on your sheet about how you could register for that. Thanks not only again to Peter and Leo, but also for the volunteers who helped set this up. And thank you to all of you for coming out on a snowy afternoon. Thank you.